So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media Interview, broadcast and recorded live on blogtalkradio.com from the new media and baseball capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. Remember when convenience stores had spinning racks with signs at the top that shouted, "Hey, kid, hey, kids, comics"? Actually, I barely remember that myself. It's been so long. Finding comic books hasn't been that easy since the late 1970s. And the comic book companies don't even make the real dough from the so-called 32-page pamphlets anymore. The real money is in selling characters to the movies or as toys. So what's a guy to do if he just wants the simple pleasure of reading a comic book? Fire up the web browser, head for ComicMix.com. ComicMix is all things to all people in comics, publishing online comic books as well as being a one-stop shop for comics news and views. Joining me today is one of the three founders of ComicMix.com, a veteran of DC Comics and others, Mike Gold. Mike, welcome to Mr. Media.
How you doing? Great to be here.
I'm good. How you been?
Not too bad. A little frantic. It occurred to me that when I was in Baltimore this weekend that the convention season never ends. So we sort of do our work in the spare time and hit all these conventions. But it's great to actually meet the fans. I've been doing conventions now for decades, and it can be, a really fulfilling experience. And I had a great time up in Baltimore.
Yeah, you're doing like the publisher's job plus. I mean, at a comic book company, a traditional company, they're getting out their own product and news of their own product. ComicMix has so many other facets to it, and maybe we should start there. Tell us a little bit about what the idea of the site is and how many things you're trying to cover.
Well, really, we're trying to cover the entire popular culture world, but pretty much from the perspective of the comic book enthusiast. If you're interested in comics of any sort, this is sort of the home base for you. Our comics are not just sort of the typical heroic fantasy that people generally associate with American comics. We reach out and get into some comics fields and genres that are of a historical nature in some cases, or might appeal a little bit more to women who've been largely ignored by the comics population in this country. Pretty much what you see in terms of depth and breadth in Japan or in Europe. I would see these foreign comics and get very jealous. I mean, they can do comic books for 72-year-old grandmothers, and I think that's great. That culture is embraced. We tend to still be in that sort of kids' comics ghetto, but when we step outside that into the rest of the popular culture, into the rest of the media, you see that people who are interested in comics and interested in the comic book type of storytelling are interested in a wide variety of other things that are generally accepted by other folks in this country. Different types of television, music, certainly movies. I mean, we've even, started to overwhelm the movie field. Paul Newman did his last or next to the last movie role in an adaptation of a graphic novel. So we're really getting respect. I'm not always sure that that's a good thing, but the idea behind ComicMix is to reflect that entire range. So that if you're interested in reading our comics online, and we have a wide variety of comics online at any given moment, most all of which are brand new. We're beginning to also put into our archive some previously published material. But we have major creators like John Ostrander and Timothy Truman and Mike Grell and Mark Wheatley and young up-and-comers like Joanna Estep and others. And some of the old pros that people haven't seen very much of lately, like underground artist Skip Williams and folks like that. This is the place. It's a wide range. And we're getting a lot of people who normally don't go into the few comic book stores that are left in America. You mentioned in your intro those great spinner racks of my youth. Yeah, they're certainly part of my youth. The comic book store is for some people, for all too many people, part of their youth. There used to be 3-4 times as many comic book stores back in the late 80s and early 90s. And I say this as one of the people who helped expand that market rather dramatically. That was great, but your average mom and pop can't make any money on a comic book. It's a high maintenance thing, and the profit is very negligible. And for the direct sales stores, for the comic book shops, your friendly neighborhood comic book retailer is buying that stuff straight out. There's no returns. If you don't buy it, he has to eat it. And if he makes too many wrong decisions or too many people in his neighborhood get, laid off or have to cut back on their comics, he can get stuck. And he bets the rent every time he places his orders. So this is the 21st century, although I think the Internet is really 20th century. And we're going out there to where the eyeballs are, to where the readers are. We will continue to reprint our material in trade paperback form as long as there's an audience for trade paperbacks, and we debuted our first 3 in special editions at Baltimore this past weekend. But I don't know if that'll be relevant 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I mean, there was a point when I said that I didn't think that the pamphlet would be relevant in 5 or 10 years. I was off by a couple, but it really isn't terribly relevant today.
Are you, and before we go on, let me give out our phone number. If you've got a question or comment for Mike Gold, a co-founder of ComicMix.com, give us a call, 646-595-3135. And before it gets too far away in the conversation, I want to mention that I believe, now you correct me if I'm wrong, the graphic novel that Paul Newman starred in was Road to Perdition?
Yes, that's true. Absolutely.
Okay. That will probably be the last bit of trivia that I will get right in this conversation, because I can honestly say that while I once was on top of every aspect of comics, I'm not as close to it as I once was. Although I still love the product and have fondness for it. What was the inspiration for ComicMix?
Well, the Internet was the inspiration. This was before the broadband days when we couldn't pull off something like ComicMix. But, I looked at this and I saw that people were beginning to sort of send books out by PDFs or by Internet form, on screen or what have you. As a matter of fact, one of my partners, Glenn Howman, who I used to work with back at DC Comics, was one of the pioneers in online book publishing. And I thought, well, I don't know if I want to read a book online, but then again, I was born a long, long time ago, and as people are walking around with notebook computers and computing is getting smaller and more versatile, I could see that happening. The next big step, of course, had to be in broadband technology, to the point where enough people had access to broadband in order to get all those complicated graphics to come across. Now, you can read ComicMix on your iPhone, and it holds up pretty well, actually. It holds up great. It's as the notebook computers are getting smaller and lighter, the Macintosh Air, I think they call it, and we're moving into tablet computing, where you have a tabloid-size page on your screen. It's a really good replacement for the pamphlet, and it also saves a lot of trees. So it was just a matter of looking at the technology that existed maybe 8-9 years ago, and sort of keeping it in the back of my mind as we were packaging books for IDW and for a few other comic book publishers at the time, and just watching it grow. And then when the time came right, Glenn and I started talking about maybe we should give this a try. Brian Alvey, who's our third partner, had already had some marked success in the online businesses, and he's a comics enthusiast and was very interested in helping make this happen.
Was there ever a point where you felt you guys had gotten in over your heads?
If I ever didn't feel that way, I think I was doing something wrong.
That's what I was going to tell you.
If you're trying to do something that people haven't done before or haven't done in a certain way before, and we're in the creative arts, so you're always striving to do that, then you're just turning out the same old stuff. And I'm not interested in that. I could have done that at DC. I could have even done that at First Comics, and that's fun and that's great. But after X number of years, I enjoy the entrepreneurial spirit. I'm never really become wealthy off of it, but I enjoy creating things. I'm more Dr. Zarkov than I'd like to believe.
Dr. Zarkov. Okay.
That little mad scientist up on the hill every once in a while lights on something really cool, but winds up doing all of this weird stuff that nobody needs or understands.
I hear you entirely. I mean, I'm very interested in what you do, and as I am in anyone doing things online, and it's basically pioneering. Everything to a degree is pioneering, whether it's ComicMix or Twitter or Facebook or Mr. Media for that matter. I mean, you're trying something and no one's been there before, and there's a lot of risk.
Yeah, if you're not getting a response when you immediately announce what you're doing, if you don't get a response from a certain number of people saying, "Oh, that's crazy, it'll never take off," forget it. Your idea is dull and boring, and you should go do something else. You really have to go out there on the edge. I mean, the internet is not on the edge. It's been there for a long time, ever since Al Gore invented it, and we've and that's a cool thing. But when I was a kid, buying those comics off of those spinner racks, a little kid, I really wanted to have like this magic box that I'd never get bored with. It's the ultimate toy, which would always be entertaining to me. And the computer is that. I mean, the home computer became that the moment that we got the internet. Now you have access to just about anything, any piece of information, although you have to be careful about the sources and, like you do with any history book, quite frankly, you have to make sure that, what you're reading is actually accurate. But we live in such a fluid society today. People are watching television, standard broadcast television, off of the internet, off of their computers. I'm listening, I can take the commuter train into New York City with my iPhone, my headphones on, and listen to radio stations live from, like, Hawaii. And that's kind of bizarre to me, but people who are half my age only find it mildly bizarre, and 5 years from now, people who are in their teens will just take that as a matter of fact. This is what we do. And I think the same thing is true for the graphic arts, all graphic arts media. What we're really doing is preparing comics, not just for the younger audience, because we don't target the younger audience, but for people who go beyond that little donut shop mentality of the comic book store, of the hardcore comics fan.
Now let me repeat our phone number. It's 646-595-3135. If you have a question for Mike Gold, or I'd be interested, if anyone calls, if you've had the experience of reading comics online. I'd like to hear about that. Mike, I'd be remiss, or one of us would be remiss, if we didn't mention that today ComicMix.com has announced, and I will read from the release just to get it right. Now every day is Free Comics Day. No more waiting until Wednesday for new comics. No more standing in line to pay $2.95 or more for a single issue of a new story, and more for a back issue. What's going on?
Well, it's just that simple. I mean, we don't charge for the comics that we produce, that our writers and artists, the writers and artists who are working with us produce. You go on to ComicMix.com and you're offered all of the different series that we have in production right now. You can have access to the stuff that we've done before, and we've been up for about a year, doing comics for pretty close to a year now. And you can get into those archives and that sort of thing. You can read it to your heart's content. You can read it today. You can read it tomorrow. We serialize the new material, and as the newer stuff comes in, we keep all of the earlier installments online. Even when we publish in hard copy form, we still keep that material online. We're essentially, giving comics away. Nothing beats free. And, we're an advertising-supported medium, just like broadcast television. So, we're a little scared about the economy, but that just means that we're part of the rest of the world who's scared about the economy right now. I think that $3 is a lot for a comic book. And I'm not trying to compare it to how much it cost when I was a kid, because everything was a lot cheaper when I was a kid, and I'm beginning to sound like my father whenever I make that argument, and except that now I understand what he was talking about. It's just a lot of money. Comics are much more interrelated. They were not interrelated at all when I was a kid. Marvel, which came out in the early 60s, started to build that, but it really didn't get maniacal with them until the late 60s. Today, if you're an X-Men fan, you're making a, $50, $60 investment every month, even if you don't read every X-Men title. Batman, pretty close to that. Superman, fairly close to that. If you're interested in the Justice League or the Avengers, or you're following, Crisis on Infinite Crises or Secret Invasion or what have you, it's, you're spending a fortune on that, and I'm just not certain it's worth it. I mean, if it is, that's an individual choice. But if you're spending a few $100s a month on comics, and I do, you're spending a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah.
You're spending a car payment on comics.
I mean, I can remember being a teen in the mid-'70s and buying everything that was on the newsstand. I mean, I'd buy the Marvels and the DCs and the Charltons and the Atlas for the year that they published, or less than that, and you'd have to come up with, I don't know, $8 to $10 maybe a month.
Yeah, it wasn't that much. It just wasn't that much. Yeah, and I was in the exact same position. I would buy just about everything. I mean, there might be certain genres that didn't appeal to me. I didn't read a lot of romance comics, but I'd buy a couple Archies here and there every once in a while. It didn't matter. It was fairly easy. It was accessible. And then we sort of evolved into, by the 1980s, where comics started getting expensive, but people felt that they can make their money back. There was an aftermarket, there was a collector's market, and if you didn't want to possess it forever and ever and ever, there was somebody out there who did. And then around 1992 or something, that blew up. So now it's just an expensive proposition. I enjoy it. I think it's a wonderful medium. My daughter reads the X-Men books. I guess I could read hers if I really wanted to, but, time is money, too, and I don't have time to read 400 X-Men books every month.
Right.
But, I enjoyed reading them back in the day. Then again, you can't take Fantastic Four away from me, so I'll read those.
Which of the major publishing companies, the print publishing companies, are doing interesting things online?
I don't think any of the majors are doing anything really interesting. Dark Horse gets pretty close to it, and from time to time, the people are doing kind of interesting things. DC has their Zuma imprints online, and some of the stuff I think that they're doing there is real interesting, but it's difficult to follow. The reader isn't very good. Their talent is great, but they don't get any real promotional support. So, not on an individual basis, just on a generic basis. And I think that they're missing the boat there. If I went to a DC-related online site, I would expect to see some Batman that I haven't seen before. Same thing with Marvel. Marvel's they're charging for their comics online, which I don't see where they're making any real money off of that. I mean, it's nice to have, and it makes some retailers feel a little bit more secure, but there's nothing new or innovative there about that. The thing about the Internet is we reach out to a much larger audience than the comic book store donut shop. Much, much bigger. The average readership of our stuff at ComicMix.com is many times greater than the average readership of your print comic book. Many, many times. Just because it's the Internet and we have the eyeballs, it attracts those eyeballs. It's just that simple. I mean, when we have stuff online that is being read by more people than are reading some of the Superman and Batman titles, and I'm not picking on DC. I mean, I can say that about some of the, Spider-Man or X-Men titles too. That's pretty bizarre, and it ain't because it's free. It's not just because it's free, although I'm sure that's a good part of it. It's because we bring it to you. It's online. It's on the Internet. You don't have to go out and find one of those comic book stores or the sort of hit or miss if you happen to live near some place that, a supermarket or something that does have a spinner rack or does carry comics that you're interested in. Sooner or later, with all these big crossovers, they're going to tie into something you can't get there anyway. So those stories will start to not make sense. Here, everything we do, it's up there online, and it'll be up there online as long as, we're doing it. And
now, Mike, the comic book conventions rose up basically in the early 70s and became a big, important part of the industry. What is a comic book convention if all the comic books are online? What happens to the comic book show?
That's a good question. I think that at some point in time, the majority of comic book reading is online, and I think that, the webcomics thing, which we're part, we sort of look more like traditional comics than some of the other webcomics do, both in terms of our art style and in terms of our formatting, and that's with malice aforethought. But even so, I think that as that grows bigger and bigger, you'll see more people at comic book conventions. You may see fewer retailers there, but unfortunately, I think that the retailers have become the less attractive part of a comic book show. People don't go to a comic book show so they can spend a lot of money on back issues because most people just can't afford it. Those back issues are way too expensive as well, and there aren't that many retailers at your average big show. San Diego, you could hardly find anything. There's just so many people there, and there's so much stuff there, including us. But there was like this little ghetto there, and where the comic book retailers were. But the panel discussions, there were 6-7 panel discussions going on at any given moment in San Diego, and in Baltimore, I guess there were 2 or 3 going on at any given moment, maybe more, at some times, and in the Wizard World stuff, that's the 3-ring circus, and that will continue. There are some smaller shows. One run by the Museum of Comics and Cartoon Art here in New York, which is really very independent-oriented, very much towards people who self-publish and go, do webcomics. Today, most of those small self-publishers are online. They may or may not be self-publishing in a hard copy. And it's exciting. It's vibrant. There are people there that there are kids there. There are even older folks there who are doing stuff that, you'd never see Marvel or DC do, nor are Marvel and DC set up to do that sort of stuff. It's a whole world out there. The manga revolution showed that. When you're tripping over 14-year-olds at Barnes & Noble to walk down the aisle, and they're lying there on the floor reading comic books, reading manga, there's a market there that we don't see in the comic book shops, where we see very little of now in the comic book shops. A lot of people like comics, and they'll show up at comic book conventions if you have the talent there, if you have the writers and the artists and the events there that people will like to go to. I helped run the Chicago Comic Con for its first 10 years. And that was, in some of those years, we were bigger than San Diego. So that I know a little bit about that field, and it's like any other part of entertainment. You give the people what they want, you please the masses. The one year that we whipped out Doctor Who, we were the first to do a Doctor Who convention. We got millions of people more than we had anticipated. It's almost a legend.
I'm guessing that some of the earlier skepticism about online comics has been replaced by curiosity, at least, if not acceptance. Is that about right?
Sure, amongst the older ends of the market. The younger end of the market, the youngest end of the market, couldn't care less. Internet, great, sure, I got the Internet, I do that. Is this cool? The Internet is driven by, is this cool? And that's a personal decision. If people find it cool, they'll come back. If they don't, they won't. But the older folks make it sound like there's this generation gap, and there really isn't. But the older end of that audience is obviously going to has taken a little bit more time to understand it, and it's not that they've understood because we've been doing it as much as it is because more and more of their life is online. They are watching YouTube, and they never even thought of the concept 5 years ago. They'd be watching all of these cool little shorts or what have you on their computer. I mean, they knew that the technology was there, but they never thought that they'd be doing that. They're listening to internet radio. They're paying their bills online instantaneously. At the last minute, you can make your mortgage payment directly, as opposed to having to worry about, getting in the car and driving to that post office that's open at 3 in the morning. You can do that. You can transfer money in your bank account, assuming your bank is still in business, and it's enormous. It's taken over our lives. It's in more and more ways. It's become this sort of central force to our lives, and comics is a part of that. Webcomics in general is a big part of that. And the cool part for us is that not only do we bring the comic book readers in because of what we're doing, but we have this huge audience that's already waiting for us. And that's really great. That's fun.
In the 40s, comics were pretty well defined by the rise of superheroes and Siegel and Schuster and Simon and Kirby, Will Eisner, got to throw him in there. In the 50s, the EC comics and the end of superheroes for a while. In the 60s, the Marvel comics and Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko. In the 70s, the 80s, I mean, Jim Lee and Frank Miller and all these kind of people. As we look at online comics, who are the superstars and what are the superstar genres for online comics?
That's a really good question, and I think that there's no simple answer to that. Right now, probably the most respected guy out there is a guy named Jeff Kinney, who did this book called Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which is now in hardcover, but started out as an online novel and cartoons. It's a little bit more prose heavy than a graphic novel, than your average graphic novel, but that's clearly one of the big ones. These things can change very, very rapidly because the internet is so fast and so instant that today's big deal is tomorrow's oh yeah right, and then tomorrow's big deal, But when Jeff does another one, then that'll start all over again because he had a huge audience from Diary of a Wimpy Kid. It was nominated for, I think, 8 Harveys at the Harvey Awards this year, and the Harveys had a whole category for online comics this year. I think it was the first time they've done that. Well, one of ours, Easy Street by Mark Wheatley and Bob Tennell, was nominated, but they're up against like the Spirit, maybe not Will's Spirit, Darwin Cook's, but still they were nominated. You'll see them up in categories against some of the established folks, some of the other people. I'm trying to remember from because literally there's so many out there, but virtually everything that you can imagine. Penny Arcade by Terry Hawkins, very big out there. Perry Bible Fellowship, very, very strong out there. Surreal Adventures of Edgar Allan Poe. So, you can Google any of these things and read them. You can read them online, generally for free. Mm-hmm. Those are pretty much the big ones right now. But 6 months from now, 3 months from now, there'll still be 5 others, 6 others. It's not. We're more in the novel business than the periodicals, those pamphlets that came out every month if they were on time, or every other month if you're really old and you remember bi-monthly printing. That was one thing. Because you can count on it every month, and you got into these habits, and those habits probably helped make my generation of comic book collectors. But today it's like novels. You're waiting for the next, Harry Potter book to come out, but it's not going to happen for another year. I mean, obviously Harry Potter isn't going to happen at all, but James Bond, whatever. You're not expecting the next one next month. We've done Grimjack and John Sable, new Grimjack and John Sable stories at ComicMix.com, and these are properties that have been around in comic books since the early 1980s, extremely popular. And Grell will be doing another John Sable, probably starting sometime next year, and Ostrander and Truman will be doing another Grimjack, again, probably starting sometime next year. Right now they're all off doing other projects that they believe in and that they're very entertained by, and in these cases that are brand new. So and they're having a swell time. So they don't have to do that next month's issue of Grimjack next month, starting that next storyline that'll automatically become the next graphic novel. They get to think of those stories as novels with a beginning, middle, and end, and not just as a periodical that goes on forever. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Obviously, there's Marvel Comics that's been around in its current format for decades, doing just that. But we've had novels coming out for a couple hundred years now.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mike, we've gone a little past the halfway point here, and I wanted to change gears a little bit. Let me give out our phone number again. I know that we've got a number of people in the web chat, and I want to encourage people, if they have a question, they can. And we have a live web chat that accompanies these interviews. Feel free to ask a question in the web chat or give us a call, 646-595-3135. You mentioned earlier that this is an advertiser-supported medium. What is kind of the business model, and how much did you have to? Can you tell us how much you had to raise to start this, and how much longer can you proceed? Give us some picture.
We had to raise enough money to support a small nation, not necessarily a Western Hemisphere, but a small nation nonetheless, and. Obviously, we always can use more because there's a lot of things that we need to do. A lot of it is dependent upon how fast we can get the newest technology up and running, and we can expand the site in ways that we've long planned. Sometimes that's kind of frustrating because, there's that desire for the new. Once you have this idea, you want it to happen immediately. And 3 months from now, 6 months from now, it happens. And, that's great, but you're already on to like 6 new ideas from there. So, there's always the desire to kind of help bring in more money or finance in order to do some of the new stuff, some of the expansionary stuff. And we're we're always going to be at that phase, I think. I mean, most businesses are, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. So when you say that, it's like an expansionist thing. If the advertising gets to be so great that, we can finance major expansions in the future, that's terrific. But our creators get a share of the advertising for their work, providing us with comic books, and it'd be real nice if they got their fair share of all that too. So we'll always be looking for money, I think, in terms of expanding. It's hard for me to imagine us just sort of sitting around and not expanding. You have the internet. There's new things that come along every 42 seconds. A dozen new things happened in the course of this interview. Mm-hmm. 1 or 2 of them would probably have some sort of impact upon us. So the business model is not a traditional business model the way businesses are structured before. The business model is an internet business model. And in that sense, our expenses may be a little higher than average, but nonetheless we're fairly traditional in terms of our business model for advertising-supported internet projects.
Do you guys have a central office, or does everyone work from home? How does that work?
No, that's the hardest adjustment for me personally. We have virtual office. We work out of our home offices and out of each other's home offices and out of laptop computers an awful lot, and now even my iPhone. I've actually commented on stuff and on the iPhone, and I think that's cool, but again, if you're half my age, you think that's just normal. So yeah, we don't have a physical one physical plant like DC has a couple of floors of the building across the street from Letterman, and we don't have that type of operation, which is nice because we don't have to spend that type of money on rent. Right. And I save an enormous amount of time not having to get on the commuter train and go into the city. It was a 2-hour commute for me each way when I was working at DC. And my boss, Dick Giordano, had a 2.5-hour commute each way. So, that's madness as far as I'm concerned. St. Petersburg, you can drive from one hurricane to another in that amount of time. But for us,
well, no, Mike, that's the advantage of the hurricane. The hurricane picks you up and delivers you to your next home.
That's good. That's good. That's great.
Let me interject for a second. I know someone just was trying to call in. I didn't want to interrupt Mike, but if you'd like to call back in, we'll get you on the air immediately. What about, can creators make as much producing a comic for online as for print? How does that part of the business work?
Oh, sure. We pay advances against royalties. Royalties are on all of the advertising and all of the hard copy sales. So, since it's up there forever, it's 30 years now, if somebody goes back and reads Easy Street online, and that's, 200 pages, and they go through the whole thing online, at that point in time, there'll be all this advertising revenue generated from all of that, and Mark and Bob, or maybe Mark and Bob's heirs, will get, their fair share of that. So it's actually an annuity. In the short run, it's good. It's competitive. In the long run, it's probably better. If you're doing those incredible books like Watchmen or something like that, then maybe not. But then again, we have our hard copy forms too. So if we have an incredible book like Watchmen, then you will be. It's just that simple. You can make at least as much money. If you're good and productive, you can even make a living. It's like all other aspects of show business. There are a lot of people who work years and years for starvation wages as people's assistants and doing free stuff, and then they get discovered and are the next overnight sensation.
How many people working full-time on ComicMix?
We have about 10 staffers full-time, maybe 12 right now. We have a large part-time staff in that our technical staff is working on a couple of other projects through companies that are financed through the same vehicle. And then we have our freelance staff, which probably is about 50 or 60 people at any given moment.
Including one of my lifetime friends, Bob Binaha, who does some lettering for you, and one or two of the books. Delighted to see Bob still in the business.
Yeah, when I asked Bob if he was looking for work, he sort of said, well, yes, people don't remember me. And I was thinking, well, that's stupid. You were doing 100 books like yesterday. What happened? Well, it's, a lot of people are bringing their lettering in-house. If you have a large staff and you have a computer, you can do computer lettering. Everybody does computer lettering. There's nothing wrong with that. But, we don't have that large staff type of situation. We don't have an office per se. We have a great production office. It's in New Jersey. And they can do all that lettering, but, we'd rather farm it out to experienced letterers who are much better at it, like Bob and John Workman, who spend their whole lives doing just that. They know what they're doing. And it doesn't cost us anything more, really. It actually costs us less. We don't pay for FedEx anymore because everybody delivers their files electronically.
Well, Mike, I've just got really one more question for you. Where is there room for improvement for online comics and online comics publishers like yourselves in general, and then ComicMix in particular? Where can you guys go in the future?
Well, there's enormous expanse for the future. The internet is always growing. The technology is always growing. Even to make specific plans, like saying 3 years from now we want to be doing this, this, and this, well, that's fine, but don't cut yourself off from the possibility of doing half a dozen things you never even considered. And that's the real trick. The trick is to keep that open mind. When you're producing comics on a day-to-day basis, hour-to-hour basis, 7 days a week, really, the internet never rests. There is that tendency to not be able to see the forest for the trees. You just get locked in. Once you've started a project, I think you have to pretty much lock in that project. This is the way we're going to do that project. We may add some pages if somebody comes up with a really cool idea to expand the story. We did that with our latest Grimjack story. That was really nice, something we couldn't do in print. But in terms of actual improvements, you know, the longer that we're around, the more we'll understand who our readers are and who our readers aren't. And we may want to go after those people who have yet to come into ComicMix by doing stuff that those people might like a little bit more. And then, you know, every once in a while we're probably going to publish something online that's just, you know, you can see on a week-to-week basis people are just dropping off. They don't care for it. We'll finish those stories, but, you know, we're probably going to be a little less likely to do that type of story again. That's always a problem. I have a problem with black and white. I love the medium. You can do great stuff in the medium. Computer people tend not to like seeing stuff in black and white. They think they're getting cheated. So you know, it's like black and white movies. You know, it's like when Turner wanted to colorize them all. The fans went nuts. But I know kids who never would have seen some of these movies, some of these great movies, if they weren't colorized. So you know, we got another black and white project featuring an established character that was done in black and white, and I think we're going to probably hold to that. But you know, you're not going to see a lot of black and white projects coming from us. There's just a real resistance to black and white online comics.
Okay. Well, folks, listen, if you've enjoyed hearing about online comics, there's an even better way to enjoy them. Go to ComicMix.com, ComicMix.com. Check it out. Free comics every day. You don't have to wait until Wednesday anymore. And Michael, thanks so much for joining us today, and good luck with this.
All right. Thank you very much, Bob. It was great fun talking with you.
Always a pleasure, Mike. Take it easy.
All right. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And folks, as always, for dozens more celebrity and media newsmaker interviews and comics interviews, surf over to our main website, www.mrmedia.com. That's where you can listen to my conversations with a lot of comics creators, including Joe Staten. I'm sorry. Oh, my God, I was going by memory, and now I've completely lost my track. Lots of comics people. Lots and lots of comics people. Trust me there. Go to mrmedia.com, and you can also find there a lot of TV and movie interviews, a lot of magazine and novelists, all kinds of stuff. And please think about writing an online review of Mr. Media, casting a vote for Mr. Media, or marking Mr. Media as one of your favorites. That's whether you listen to us on Blog Talk Radio, DigitalJournal.com, Podcast Pickle, Vox, Folio, MediaFly, Podfeed.net, Blueberry, Zencast, Odeo, the Kindle Reader, or iTunes. And if you've got an idea for a guest, email me directly at bob@andelman.com. It's ANDELMAN. Thanks for joining us today. I appreciate when you take a little time out of your day to spend it with us. Come on back real soon.